They thought humans feared meat. Then he cooked the galaxy's apex predator part. Danny Walsh wiped his hands on his apron and looked around the pristine kitchen. Everything gleamed with that sterile, lifeless shine that made him uncomfortable. The counters held no scratches from years of chopping. The ovens had never seen real fire. Even the air smelled wrong, filtered and processed until nothing organic remained. "This is where they want me to cook?" he muttered. His assistant, a floating orb named Pip, bobbed nervously beside him. The little drone had been assigned to help Danny navigate Station Harmony, though it seemed more interested in keeping him out of trouble. "Chef Walsh, the galactic feast begins in 6 hours," Pip chirped. "The menu has been prepared according to standard protocols. All meals are nutritionally balanced and synthesized to perfection." Danny picked up one of the meal packets. Gray paste. He squeezed it onto a plate. It formed a perfect dome, odorless and uniform. Somewhere in the galaxy, 70 different species would eat this exact same thing and call it a feast. "Where I come from, we'd call this prison food," Danny said. "I do not understand. The nutritional value exceeds—" "No, it's got no soul, Pip, no history. Nobody's grandmother made this recipe." The drone's lights flickered in confusion. Danny had learned that most species in the galactic community had moved past traditional eating centuries ago. They saw cooking as primitive, inefficient. Why spend hours preparing food when you could consume perfect nutrition in seconds? But Earth had only joined the community 3 years ago, and humans hadn't gotten the memo about giving up their steaks and stir-fries. Danny walked to the viewport and stared at the massive station curving away in both directions. Station Harmony housed over 10,000 beings from across the galaxy. It was supposed to be a symbol of unity, a place where all species could coexist peacefully, except there was nothing peaceful about the screaming he heard down the corridor. Workers scattered as something massive crashed through a storage area. Alarms blared. Red lights pulsed along the walls. Danny moved toward the commotion while Pip frantically beeped warnings behind him. He rounded the corner and stopped. The creature stood almost 8 feet tall on 6 powerful legs. Its body was covered in overlapping plates that looked harder than steel. 3 rows of teeth filled a mouth designed for ripping, not chewing. Its eyes, all 4 of them, glowed with predatory intelligence. "Ravager!" someone shouted. "Seal the section." Station security arrived, pointing weapons that hummed with energy, but they kept their distance. Danny had read the briefing files. Ravagers had killed 3 workers in the past month. They were fast, aggressive, and nearly impossible to stop once they attacked. Commander Lorik, a tall being with blue skin and too many joints in his arms, barked orders. "Containment team, where are you? We need sedation protocols now." The Ravager snarled and smashed through a support beam like it was paper. It was heading straight for the kitchen area, drawn by something in the storage units. Danny studied the creature with a cook's eye. He noted the muscle structure, the way it moved, the thickness of its armor. His grandmother used to take him hunting in the Louisiana bayou. She taught him that every animal, no matter how dangerous, had its weaknesses. "Chef Walsh, we must evacuate immediately," Pip insisted. Instead, Danny walked calmly back into the kitchen. He opened a drawer and pulled out the sharpest knife available. It wasn't much compared to his tools back home, but it would do. "What are you doing?" Pip's voice went high with panic. "My job," Danny said. "Can't have pests in my kitchen." The Ravager crashed through the kitchen entrance, scattering equipment. It saw Danny and paused, probably confused why this small creature wasn't running. Then it charged. Danny had maybe 3 seconds. He grabbed a storage container and hurled it at the creature's face, not to hurt it, but to make it blink. In that split second of distraction, he moved. Not away, but to the side and forward, getting inside the arc of its attack. His grandmother's voice echoed in his memory. "Everything's got a soft spot, Danny boy. You just gotta know where to look." The knife found the gap between armor plates right where the neck met the shoulder. It was the same principle as bleeding out a gator, just scaled up. The Ravager thrashed, but Danny held on, using the creature's own momentum against it. 30 seconds later, the beast collapsed. Danny stood over it, breathing hard but unhurt. Security teams rushed in, weapons ready, and froze at the scene. Commander Lorik pushed through the crowd, his face unreadable. "You killed it," Lorik said slowly. "Yeah," Danny replied, already kneeling beside the carcass. He ran his hand along the armor plates, checking the meat underneath. "And now I'm gonna cook it." The silence that followed was absolute. "I beg your pardon?" Lorik finally managed. Danny looked up, genuinely confused by the reaction. It's fresh. Would be a waste to throw it out. I can have it prepped in a few hours. The feast could use some real food. That is a Ravager, Lorik said, like Danny might have missed that detail. Its toxin glands alone could kill half the species on this station. Then we don't use the toxin glands, Danny said simply. He pulled out his personal kit, the one he'd brought from Earth. Real knives, not synthesized ones. Look, Commander, I came here to show the galaxy what human cooking is about. Well, this is it. We take what tries to kill us and we make it dinner. Pip made a sound like a computer crashing. You cannot be serious, Lorik said. Dead serious. No pun intended. Danny started sectioning the carcass with professional efficiency. Your people have been afraid of these things. I get it, they're scary. But on Earth we've got gators, bears, sharks, you name it. All dangerous. All delicious if you know what you're doing. Ambassador Trill of the Moraxian Collective appeared in the doorway, his translucent body rippling with disgust. This is barbaric.
Eating a creature that kills sapient beings?
Absolutely not. Danny kept working. With respect, Ambassador, it attacked my kitchen. That makes it food. The argument that followed would echo through the entire galactic community. But Danny Walsh just kept breaking down the Ravager, mentally planning his menu, wondering if the meat would take a dry rub or if it needed a marinade. The argument in the kitchen had moved to the council chamber, but Danny stayed behind with his work. He'd butchered deer, pigs, and even an ostrich once. This wasn't much different, just bigger and with more interesting anatomy. Fascinating, he murmured, examining the muscle structure, dense, well-marbled. The armor plates came off easier than he expected, revealing pale meat underneath. He set aside the toxin glands carefully, triple bagging them for disposal. Pip hovered nearby, sensors focused on Danny's every move. Chef Walsh, the council has summoned you. Tell them I'm busy. They were quite insistent. So am I. Danny started separating the prime cuts from the tougher sections. The latter would need slow cooking, maybe a braise. Pip, can you access the station's database? I need to know what spices and herbs are available. Chef Walsh, please. Pip, I've got maybe 4 hours to prep this properly. The drone's lights flickered and what Danny had learned meant resignation. Accessing culinary database. However, I must inform you that Commander Lorik has ordered you to appear before the council immediately. Then he can come here. I'm not leaving this meat unattended. Danny had found what he was looking for, a section along the back that reminded him of tenderloin. This is the good stuff right here. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Lorik entered with Ambassador Trill and several other council members. They stopped at the kitchen entrance, staring at the organized chaos of Danny's workspace. Meat sections laid out on sanitized surfaces, tools arranged with military precision, and Danny himself covered in blue-green blood working with absolute focus. Chef Walsh, Lorik began. Commander, Danny replied without looking up. You're just in time. I need a ruling on something. Are there any species attending the feast that can't process proteins? I don't want to accidentally poison anyone. Trill's body rippled with colors that Danny's translator indicated meant extreme displeasure. You are actually proceeding with this madness? Yes, sir. This is a 40-pound roast right here. Gonna slow cook it with what Pip tells me is similar to rosemary. The ribs I'll do with a spice rub and high heat. The tougher cuts go into a stew. Danny finally looked up. Unless you're ordering me not to? Lorik exchanged glances with the other council members. A being covered in feathers, Representative Quinn from the Avian Collective, spoke up. The creature is already dead. Wasting it seems illogical. It tried to kill our chef, added a reptilian representative. If he wishes to cook it, perhaps we should respect his customs. Trill pulsed angry reds. This sets a dangerous precedent. Today he cooks a Ravager. Tomorrow what? Where does it end? Danny set down his knife and gave Trill his full attention. Ambassador, I understand your concern. Really, I do. But let me ask you something. What do your people eat? We consume photosynthetic nutrients. We have evolved beyond the need for, right, but your ancestors? Somewhere back in your evolutionary line, they ate something. Maybe plants, maybe something else. Every species here survived somehow. Danny gestured at the Ravager. Humans survived because we learned to eat things that wanted to eat us. We learned to cook poison out of plants. We figured out how to make food from things that would kill us raw. That's our history. I'm not asking you to like it, just to understand it. The council chamber fell quiet. Another representative, a crystalline being named Shard, spoke in chiming tones. The human makes a valid point. We all have survival strategies. Perhaps we have been too quick to judge theirs. Lorik raised a hand for silence. Here is my decision. Chef Walsh, you may prepare the Ravager. However, you will taste it first. If you survive, when I survive, Danny corrected. If you survive, Lorik repeated firmly, and if the meal proves edible, you may serve it at the feast. But understand this, the entire galaxy will be watching. Humanity's application to the Galactic Council is still under review. This will factor into that decision. Danny nodded slowly. No pressure then. None whatsoever, Lorik said without humor. You have 4 hours. The council members filed out except for Quinn, who lingered. Chef Walsh, may I observe? I find myself curious about these preparation methods. Pull up a chair, Danny said. Just don't touch anything until I tell you it's safe. For the next 4 hours, Danny worked with an intensity that impressed even Pip. He showed Quinn how to render the fat, explaining that it would add flavor to the leaner cuts. He demonstrated the art of seasoning not to hide the meat's natural taste but to enhance it. On Earth we have a saying, Danny explained while preparing a marinade. You are what you eat. These Ravagers, they've been eating whatever they could catch on this station. That's going to affect the flavor, so I need to balance it out. Your species has devoted significant mental resources to food preparation, Quinn observed. Well, we had to. A bad meal could kill you. Undercooked chicken, you get sick. Eat the wrong mushroom, you die. So we got really good at knowing what to cook and how to cook it. Danny started searing the first piece of meat. The smell that filled the kitchen was unlike anything the station had ever experienced. Pip's sensors went wild. Chef Walsh, that aroma is triggering responses in species throughout the station. Security reports beings gathering outside the kitchen. Good, Danny said. That's called appetite. He worked through marinades, rubs, and cooking methods that his grandmother had taught him. Low and slow for the tough cuts. Hot and fast for the tender ones. Each piece of Ravager received individual attention, treated not as monster meat but as ingredients with potential. Quinn watched in fascination as Danny explained Maillard reactions, the science of browning meat. You are essentially restructuring the molecular bonds through thermal application. Yeah, but we just call it cooking, Danny grinned. Finally, with 30 minutes to spare, Danny plated the first serving. The meat glistened, properly rested and sliced. He'd prepared it 7 different ways, each showcasing a different technique. The smell alone had drawn a crowd outside the kitchen. Danny picked up his fork. Lorik had returned with medical staff on standby. Last chance to back out, Lorik offered. Danny cut a piece of the slow-roasted section. It fell apart with the slightest pressure, a good sign. He raised it to his mouth. Here's to new experiences, he said, and took a bite. The texture was perfect. The flavor hit his palate in waves, gamey but not overpowering, with the herbs bringing out a subtle sweetness. He chewed slowly, professionally analyzing every aspect. Then he swallowed. The room held its breath. Danny smiled. Tastes like alligator with a hint of venison. The rosemary-like herb works perfectly with it. He took another bite. Yeah, this is good. Real good, Pip made a sound like applause. Quinn's feathers ruffled with what the translator indicated was amazement. Lorik stepped forward slowly. May I? Danny handed him a plate. Start with this piece. It's the most mild. The commander took a small bite. His expression shifted from apprehension to surprise to something approaching pleasure. He took another bite, larger this time. This is extraordinary, Lorik admitted. Word spread through the station like wildfire. Within minutes, a line had formed outside the kitchen. Species that had never shown interest in meat, that had considered eating flesh barbaric, wanted to try the meal that had conquered their station's nightmare. Ambassador Trill watched from a distance, his body dark with disapproval. But even he could not deny the crowd's reaction. Danny Walsh had done the impossible. He had taken fear and turned it into food, turned death into dinner, and in doing so, had given the galaxy a new perspective on humanity. 3 days after the feast, Danny found himself famous in ways he never wanted. His face appeared on news feeds across 70 worlds. Some called him a genius. Others called him a savage. Nobody called him boring. The kitchen had become a tourist attraction. Beings pressed against the viewing windows watching him work. Pip had started charging for tours, though Danny suspected the little drone was pocketing the credits. Chef Walsh, you have 17 interview requests, Pip announced. Tell them I'm busy. You said that yesterday. Still true today. Danny was breaking down another Ravager. Station security had started bringing him their catches instead of disposing of them. The station's pest problem was becoming the station's most popular restaurant. How many is this now? 12 Ravagers this week. The population has decreased 40%. Good. Danny sectioned a shoulder cut. These things breed fast. Keep hunting them, and I'll keep cooking them. Quinn entered the kitchen, now a regular visitor. The avian representative had become fascinated with human cooking methods. Chef Walsh, I've been studying your techniques. The application of heat creates flavors that synthesis cannot replicate. That's because cooking isn't just about nutrients. It's chemistry, sure, but it's also art. You're transforming ingredients. Danny demonstrated a knife technique. See how I cut against the grain here? Makes the meat more tender. Remarkable. Quinn made notes on a tablet. I wish to propose something to the council. A culinary exchange program. Human chefs teaching our methods, learning yours. Danny paused mid-cut. You serious? Entirely. Your feast changed perspectives. Several species have begun questioning whether we lost something valuable when we abandoned traditional food preparation. Before Danny could respond, alarms blared throughout the station. Not the standard Ravager alert. This was something else, deeper and more urgent. Lorek's voice boomed through the communication system. All personnel emergency council session. Priority Alpha. Danny wiped his hands and followed Quinn to the council chamber. The room buzzed with anxious energy. Representatives from dozens of species talked over each other, their translators creating a cacophony of worried voices. Lorek called for silence. A holographic display appeared, showing a beautiful blue and green world. This is Vryn Prime, homeworld of the Vryn people. A new representative stepped forward, a being that looked like a cross between a snail and a flower. Its shell gleamed with pearl colors, and its voice came through the translator soft and melodic. I am Speaker Bloom of the Vryn Collective. My people face extinction. The display changed, showing massive swarms of insects covering entire cities. The shredder swarms have overwhelmed our defenses. We have tried barriers, repellents, relocation. Nothing stops them. They consume everything organic. In 3 months, our homeworld will be uninhabitable. The council erupted in discussion. Everyone had suggestions, none helpful. Energy barriers, orbital bombardment, atmospheric processors. The Vryn had tried them all. Danny studied the images. The shredders moved in coordinated waves, stripping whole forests in hours. But something about their behavior pattern looked familiar. How fast do they reproduce? Danny asked. The room quieted. Speaker Bloom turned toward him. Exponentially. One shredder can spawn 100 offspring in a week. What do they eat? Everything. Plants, animals, buildings, even some metals. No, I mean, what do they prefer? All predators have preferences. Speaker Bloom's shell darkened. They seem to prefer protein-rich sources. They've devastated our livestock, our wildlife, even our protein synthesis facilities. Danny nodded slowly. And let me guess, your people are herbivores? You don't hunt? We are a peaceful species. We have never taken life for sustenance. Right. Danny looked at the images again. Commander Lorek, can I see the biological analysis of these shredders? Lorek pulled up the data. Danny scrolled through it, reading the chemical composition, the protein structures, the nutritional breakdown. A smile slowly spread across his face. What are you thinking, Chef Walsh? Quinn asked. I'm thinking these shredders are basically space locusts. And on Earth, people eat locusts. They're actually pretty nutritious. Danny turned to Speaker Bloom. Have you tried eating them? The entire council chamber fell silent. Speaker Bloom's color shifted through several shades Danny couldn't interpret. Eat them, Speaker Bloom finally said. They are a plague. A nightmare. They kill our children. So did Ravagers, Danny said quietly, until we changed how we looked at them. Speaker Bloom, your people are dying because you're seeing this as a war. But what if it's actually a resource management problem? Ambassador Trill pulsed angry colors. This human suggests solving every problem by eating it. This is absurd, is it? Danny challenged. You've got an invasive species with explosive reproduction rates. You can't out-tech them, you can't outrun them. But what if you could out-eat them? Lorek leaned forward. Explain. Danny pulled up the biological data and highlighted sections. Look at this. The shredders are 70% protein, low toxicity, and they're everywhere. That's not a plague, Commander. That's a food supply. A renewable one if managed right. You want us to harvest them? Speaker Bloom's voice trembled. I want to teach you how. Not just random hunting. Sustainable harvesting. Control the population, use them to feed your people. Turn a death spiral into a stable ecosystem. Danny looked around the room. On Earth, we've dealt with invasive species for thousands of years. Sometimes the answer isn't elimination. It's integration. Quinn's feathers ruffled excitedly. The human is correct. Many Earth cultures have developed sophisticated methods for managing animal populations through controlled harvesting. But we are not predators, Speaker Bloom protested. We do not have the constitution for such actions. You don't have to be, Danny said. That's where humans come in. We'll do the hunting, the processing. We'll teach you the cooking methods that make them edible for your biology. You just have to be willing to try. Lorik looked at Speaker Bloom. It is your decision. The Vryn representative was silent for a long moment. Its shell colors shifted through patterns Danny guessed meant deep thought. My people are desperate, Speaker Bloom finally said. If there is any chance, we must take it. Chef Walsh, will you come to Vryn Prime? Danny didn't hesitate. Pack me a ship. I'll need some supplies and maybe a few other human hunters who know what they're doing. I volunteer to accompany the mission, Quinn announced. For documentation purposes, Trill pulsed dark colors. This is madness. You are sending a cook to solve a planetary crisis. No, Lorik corrected. We are sending someone who sees solutions where others see only problems. Chef Walsh, you will have full council support. Save the Vryn, and humanity's position in the galactic community will be secured. Danny nodded. No pressure, right? None whatsoever, Lorik said, and this time there was almost a smile in his voice. As the council dispersed, Danny returned to his kitchen. Pip followed, unusually quiet. Chef Walsh, the shredder swarms have killed millions of Vryn. What makes you think you can stop them? Danny began packing his knives, each one a tool he'd used for years. I don't need to stop them, Pip. I just need to change how people see them. Fear makes things bigger than they are. But once you understand something, really understand it, he held up a cleaver. Well, then it's just ingredients. The next morning, Danny Walsh boarded a transport ship bound for Vryn Prime, carrying nothing but his knives, his grandmother's recipes, and a crazy idea that just might save a world. Behind him, Station Harmony buzzed with speculation. Some said he was a hero, some said he was insane, but everyone agreed on one thing. Humans looked at the galaxy very differently than everyone else. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what the galaxy needed. Vryn Prime looked beautiful from orbit. Swirls of blue oceans and green continents reminded Danny of Earth. But as the transport descended, the damage became visible. Brown scars cut across forests. Empty cities stood like skeletons. And everywhere, the shredders moved in dark clouds. Sweet Mother of Mercy, Danny whispered. Quinn stood beside him, feathers flat against his body. The devastation is worse than the reports indicated. The transport landed in one of the few protected zones, a domed city where the Vryn had retreated. Speaker Bloom met them at the landing pad, accompanied by dozens of Vryn whose shells had lost their shine from stress. Chef Walsh, welcome to what remains of our home. Speaker Bloom gestured at the dome overhead. The barriers hold for now, but our food stores dwindle. In weeks we will face starvation even if the shredders never breach our walls. Danny studied the dome. Through the transparent sections, he could see the shredders pressing against the barriers like a living tide. How thick is that dome? 3 feet of reinforced composite, they cannot chew through it. Yet, Danny added, they'll adapt. Pests always do. He turned to face the gathered Vryn. Speaker Bloom, I need to see the shredders up close. I need to understand them before I can help you. A Vryn scientist named Root stepped forward. We have observation posts, but I must warn you the shredders are aggressive. They attack any organic matter that ventures outside. Perfect, Danny said, shouldering his pack. Let's go meet them. The observation post sat at the edge of the dome, offering a clear view of the devastation. Root provided Danny with a protective suit and a sample container on a long pole. The suit is coated with a substance the shredders avoid, Root explained. It will give you perhaps 10 minutes before they adapt to it. Danny nodded and stepped through the airlock. The ground outside was stripped bare, not even grass remained. The shredders covered every surface, each about the size of his thumb but moving with disturbing coordination. He extended the sample container. Immediately, shredders swarmed toward it, drawn by the bait Root had placed inside. Within seconds, the container teemed with specimens. Danny pulled it back and sealed it. Back inside, he emptied the shredders into a containment unit. Under proper lighting, he could study them carefully. Hard shells, multiple legs, mandibles designed for cutting. But what caught his attention was how they moved together, responding to each other's pheromones. They're not individual hunters, Danny observed. They're more like cells in a body. The swarm is the organism, not the individual shredder. Root's shell brightened with interest. That matches our research. They share chemical signals, coordinate their movements. It's what makes them so difficult to combat. Danny pulled out his tablet and started making notes. On Earth, we've got army ants. Similar behavior. They move in massive colonies, strip everything in their path. But they're also predictable once you understand the pattern. He looked at Root. Do the shredders have a reproductive cycle? Times when they're more active or less? They spawn continuously, but there are peak periods every 7 days, so they're vulnerable right after spawning. The colony focuses on reproduction instead of feeding. Danny smiled. That's when we hit them. Over the next 3 days, Danny worked with Root and a team of human hunters who'd arrived from Earth. There was Rita, who'd managed invasive species in Australia. Carlos, who'd dealt with locust plagues in South America. And Sue, a marine biologist who understood swarm dynamics. Together, they studied the shredders' patterns, identified their weak points, and developed a strategy. The key is not to fight them, Danny explained to Speaker Bloom. We need to harvest them like a crop. Take enough to control the population, but leave enough to maintain a sustainable cycle. Speaker Bloom's colors shifted uncertainly. And you believe this will work? It has to. Fighting them head-on hasn't worked. Running hasn't worked. Time to try something different. The first harvest operation launched on day 4. Humans in protective gear moved into the swarm zones during a spawning cycle. They used modified vacuum systems to collect thousands of shredders per minute, targeting the newly spawned ones that hadn't developed full mobility yet. The Vryn watched from the dome, horrified and fascinated in equal measure. Rita coordinated the teams with military precision. Sector 3, you're at capacity. Rotate out. Sector 5, move in. Within 6 hours, they'd collected over 10 tons of shredders. The swarms, confused by the sudden population drop, retreated temporarily to regroup. Back in a processing facility, Danny began the most important part. He needed to make these creatures edible for the Vryn. Their biology is different from humans, Root reminded him. What is safe for you may be toxic for us. Danny nodded. That's why we test everything carefully. He'd already run the shredders through a dozen analytical machines, breaking down their chemical composition. The meat itself was safe, but the digestive glands contained compounds that would make Vryn sick. So we remove the bad parts, keep the good parts, Danny explained, demonstrating the cleaning process. Same principle as preparing earth shrimp. You don't eat the whole thing. The cooking process took experimentation. Vryn tasted things differently than humans. What Danny found flavorful, they found bland. What they enjoyed, he found overwhelming. But slowly, through trial and error, they found common ground. The breakthrough came when Danny tried roasting the shredders with a local plant that the Vryn used for medicine. The combination neutralized the bitter compounds while enhancing the protein absorption. Speaker Bloom was the first Vryn to try the prepared shredders. The entire colony watched as their leader placed a small piece in their mouth. The wait felt eternal. Speaker Bloom's shell flickered through several colors, then settled on a warm golden hue. It is acceptable. More than acceptable. It is nourishing. The Vryn erupted in their equivalent of cheers, a harmonic humming that filled the dome. But Danny knew this was just the beginning. Speaker Bloom, eating them once doesn't solve the problem. Your people need to integrate this into your culture. You need to see the shredders not as enemies but as a resource. That is a significant shift in perspective, Speaker Bloom admitted. I know. But it's necessary. Danny looked out at the swarms beyond the dome. On Earth, we learned that the best way to preserve something is to give it value. Make the shredders valuable to your survival, and suddenly you're not trying to exterminate them. You're managing them. Over the following weeks, Danny trained Vryn volunteers in harvesting techniques. They were gentle beings, uncomfortable with the killing, but desperate enough to learn. He taught them to see it not as violence, but as ecosystem management. Carlos set up sustainable harvesting zones, areas where shredders could be collected without disrupting the broader population. Think of it like fishing, he explained to the Vryn. You take some, leave some, let the population recover. Sue worked on understanding the shredder breeding cycles, finding ways to predict and utilize peak spawning periods. If we time the harvests right, we can keep the population stable indefinitely. Rita trained security teams in rapid response harvesting, turning the Vryn's defensive forces into something more like farmers. And Danny kept cooking, developing recipes that worked with Vryn biology while actually tasting good. He created shredder cakes, roasted shredder with local herbs, even a shredder soup that became surprisingly popular. The turning point came 6 weeks into the operation. A group of Vryn children, who'd grown up knowing only fear of the shredders, tried Danny's sweet-spiced shredder cakes. A young Vryn named Petal took a bite, and their shell brightened with delight. Can I have more? That simple question, that moment of a child asking for seconds of the monster that had haunted their nightmares, changed everything. Speaker Bloom watched with tears in their eyes. You have given us more than food, Chef Walsh. You have given us our future back. Danny smiled. I just showed you a different way of looking at things. Your people did the hard part. You were willing to change. As Danny prepared to leave Vryn Prime, the planet looked different. The swarms were still there, but smaller, controlled. The Vryn had begun expanding beyond their domes, setting up harvesting stations instead of defense barriers. Will it last? Quinn asked as they boarded the transport. Danny looked down at the planet, at the Vryn moving confidently through areas that had been death zones months before. If they keep at it, yeah. They've learned that survival isn't always about fighting. Sometimes it's about adapting. The transport lifted off, carrying Danny back to Station Harmony. Behind him, an entire species was learning to live with their nightmare by making it their sustenance. And across the galaxy, other species were taking notice. News of Vryn Prime spread faster than Danny expected. By the time his transport docked at Station Harmony, he had 43 requests waiting. Planets with apex predator problems, colonies overrun by invasive species, worlds where the local wildlife had become too dangerous to manage. Everyone wanted the human who cooked monsters. This is getting out of hand, Danny told Pip while unpacking his gear. You have become famous, Chef Walsh. Several species are calling you the predator tamer. I just cook things. Danny hung up his knives, each one cleaned and sharpened. People are making this bigger than it is. Lorik entered the kitchen without knocking, which had become his habit. Chef Walsh, the council needs to speak with you. Let me guess, more planets want help? 17, actually. But that is not why I am here. Lorik's expression was serious. Ambassador Trill has called for a formal inquiry into your methods. He is arguing that humanity represents a dangerous influence on galactic culture. Danny stopped unpacking. He's still on that? He has support. Several elder species believe that your approach encourages primitive behaviors. There are concerns about where this leads. And what do you think, Commander? Lorik was quiet for a moment. I think you saved the Vryn. I think you solved our Ravager problem. But I also think Trill's concerns are not entirely without merit. You are changing how species view predation. And change frightens people. The council chamber was packed. Representatives from across the galaxy had come to witness the inquiry. Danny sat in the center, feeling very much like he was on trial. Trill began the proceeding, his translucent body glowing with intensity. Chef Walsh, you have introduced predatory thinking to species that evolved beyond such behavior. You encourage the killing and consumption of creatures. Some might call this progress. I call it regression. Danny listened carefully before responding. Ambassador, with respect, I haven't introduced anything. Predation exists in nature regardless of how evolved a species becomes. I've just shown people how to work with it instead of pretending it doesn't exist. You make violence palatable, Trill countered. You take creatures that kill sapient beings and turn them into meals. This normalizes death. No, it contextualizes death. Danny leaned forward. Every species here evolved somehow. Your ancestors survived environmental pressures. Some ran faster, some hid better, some grew toxins. Humans learned to hunt. That's not moral or immoral, Ambassador. It's just what happened. A representative from the Silicon Collective spoke up, their voice like grinding rocks. The human makes a valid point. Evolution does not follow ethics. It follows survival. But we have transcended mere survival, Trill argued. We have built a civilization based on cooperation, not consumption. Have you? Danny challenged. Because from where I'm sitting, the Vryn were dying until someone was willing to do what your cooperation couldn't. Sometimes survival requires getting your hands dirty. Quinn stood. If I may interject, I have observed Chef Walsh extensively. His methods are not about violence for its own sake. They are about understanding ecosystems and finding balance. This is sophisticated thinking, not primitive. He eats sapient-killing creatures. Trill's body flared bright. The Ravagers and Shredders are not sapient, Danny corrected. They're animals. Dangerous ones, sure, but animals. And animals have been part of human survival for thousands of years. We don't apologize for that. Speaker Bloom entered the chamber, their shell gleaming with health. Ambassador Trill, may I speak? Trill's colors dimmed slightly. Of course, Speaker Bloom. 3 months ago, my people were dying. We faced extinction not from war or disease, but from our own inability to adapt. We begged the Council for help. Many offered sympathy. Some offered technology. None offered solutions that worked. Speaker Bloom moved to stand beside Danny. This human offered something different. Not superiority, not violence, but perspective. He taught us that survival sometimes means seeing our fears differently. You are eating creatures that killed your children, Trill said quietly. Yes, Speaker Bloom replied, and it was the hardest thing my people have ever done. But those children are safe now because we learned to manage the threat instead of running from it. Chef Walsh did not make us into predators, Ambassador. He taught us to be survivors. The chamber fell silent. Danny could see representatives processing this, their various forms of expression showing deep thought. Another voice spoke up. Representative Garth, a being of liquid metal, addressed the council. I must confess something. My world, Pharaohs, faces a similar crisis. Metallic parasites that consume our infrastructure. We have lost 3 cities. I came here to request Chef Walsh's assistance but hesitated, fearing judgment. Garth turned to Trill. Your concerns about primitive behavior, I shared them. But watching the Vryn transformation, I wonder if our true primitiveness is refusing to adapt when adaptation is necessary. Trill's colors shifted through patterns Danny couldn't read. You all see a hero. I see a dangerous precedent. Today we cook the things that threaten us. Tomorrow, what stops us from seeing other sapients as threats? Danny stood. May I answer that directly, Ambassador? Trill gestured for him to proceed. What stops us is the same thing that stopped humans from eating each other despite being capable of it. Empathy. Community. The recognition that some beings are not food. They're people. Danny looked around the chamber. On Earth, we had to learn that line. It wasn't always pretty, and we made mistakes, but we learned. The difference between a Ravager and a Vryn isn't that one tastes better. It's that one can talk back. He walked closer to Trill. You're worried about a slippery slope. I get it, but here's the thing, Ambassador. I've been on dozens of worlds now. I've met hundreds of species. And every single time I sit down to eat with someone, share a meal with them, break bread together, they stop being alien. They start being friends. You can't eat someone you've shared a meal with. That's not a loophole in my philosophy, it's the whole point. Pretty words, Trill said. But words are easy. Then let me prove it with actions. Danny pulled out a container he'd brought with him. I prepared something special for this meeting. A meal that represents what I'm trying to say. He opened the container to reveal dozens of small dishes, each one different. This feast uses ingredients from 20 different worlds. Some are from plants. Some are from creatures, some are synthesized, but every dish was prepared in collaboration with chefs from those worlds. I didn't just make Earth food. I learned your techniques, your flavors, your traditions, and I mixed them with mine. Danny handed out the dishes. Even Trill received one, though he hesitated. This isn't human food or alien food, Danny continued. It's shared food. It's proof that predators can sit at the same table as everyone else. Not because we've stopped being predators, but because we've chosen to use that aspect of ourselves for building rather than destroying. Lorek tasted his dish and his expression softened. "This is extraordinary," Quinn hummed with pleasure. "The flavors are perfectly balanced." Speaker Bloom tried theirs and their shell glowed. "You have honored our ingredients." Even Garth, whose liquid metal body processed food differently, appreciated the gesture. The thought behind this matters more than the consumption. All eyes turned to Trill. The ambassador looked at his dish for a long moment. Then slowly he tried it. His body went through several color changes. Finally, he settled on a soft blue that Danny's translator indicated meant contemplation. "It is well prepared," Trill admitted quietly. "And I understand your message, Chef Walsh. But understanding does not mean I agree fully. My concerns remain." "That's fair," Danny said. "I'm not asking you to love what I do, Ambassador. I'm just asking you to see that humanity's way isn't wrong, it's just different. We can coexist. We can even learn from each other. But only if we're willing to sit at the same table." Lorek stood. "The Council must vote on humanity's full membership. But before we do, I want to say something. Chef Walsh, you have shown us that strength comes in many forms. Intelligence, compassion, cooperation, yes. But also adaptation, courage, and the willingness to face what others fear. These are valuable traits. The vote took less time than Danny expected. 63 species voted to accept humanity into full Council membership. 7 abstained, including Trill. None voted against. The motion passes, Lorek announced. Humanity is welcomed as a full member of the Galactic Council. Cheers erupted from the human delegation. Quinn's feathers fluffed with joy. Speaker Bloom hummed harmonically. Even some of the skeptical species offered respectful acknowledgement. After the ceremony, Trill approached Danny privately. "Chef Walsh, I owe you honesty. I still have reservations about your methods. I know. But I also must acknowledge that you have helped species that no one else could. And your point about shared meals." Trill's colors shifted. "It resonates more than I wish to admit. Does this mean you'll come to my restaurant sometime?" Danny asked with a slight smile. "Perhaps, though I may stick to the plant-based options." "Fair enough. I make a mean salad too." Trill's body flickered in what might have been amusement. "I believe you do." As the ambassador walked away, Pip floated up beside Danny. "Chef Walsh, you have 17 planets still waiting for your assistance. How will you manage all these requests?" Danny looked out at the diverse species mingling in the chamber, former skeptics now talking with humans, barriers breaking down one conversation at a time. "I won't," Danny said. "But I can teach others, humans and aliens working together. If this whole experience has taught me anything, it's that the best solutions come when different perspectives collaborate." "You are planning to establish a training program?" "Something like that. A culinary academy where humans teach hunting and cooking, and aliens teach us their traditions and knowledge. Everyone brings something to the table, literally." Pip's lights flickered with approval. "That is an excellent plan," Danny smiled. "Glad you think so, because you're going to help me organize it." "Me?" Pip's voice squeaked. "I am merely a support drone. You're my friend, Pip, and I'm going to need all the friends I can get for this next part." As Station Harmony celebrated humanity's acceptance, Danny Walsh stood at the viewing port, looking out at the vast galaxy. Somewhere out there, species faced challenges they couldn't overcome alone. But now they didn't have to, because sometimes the answer to your biggest problem is learning to look at it through someone else's eyes, preferably over a good meal. 6 months after humanity joined the Galactic Council, Danny Walsh stood in front of his newest project. The building sprawled across an entire section of Station Harmony. Its sign written in 70 different languages and scripts, the Galactic Culinary Institute. "It's bigger than I imagined," Quinn said, admiring the structure. "Had to be. We've got students from 40 species enrolled for the first semester." Danny smiled. "Never thought I'd become a teacher." Pip bobbed excitedly nearby. "The dormitories are prepared. The kitchens are equipped with multi-species cooking systems, and the safety protocols have been reviewed 17 times. "Only 17? Danny joked. "Getting sloppy, Pip." The first class of students arrived that afternoon. A mix of humans and aliens, young and old, each bringing their own perspective and culture. Danny watched them file into the main hall, noting their nervous excitement. There was Petal, the young Vryn who'd first asked for seconds of shredder cakes. Now old enough to attend the institute, their shell gleamed with anticipation. A human named Andy from Texas who'd worked on his family's ranch. 2 avians from Quinn's world, their feathers marked with cooking clan symbols. Even a Silicon Collective member named Prism, whose crystalline body could withstand temperatures that would kill most species. Danny stepped to the front of the hall. Welcome to the Galactic Culinary Institute. I'm Danny Walsh, and I'm going to be honest with you. This isn't a normal cooking school. We're not here just to teach recipes or techniques. We're here to build bridges. He gestured to the diverse crowd. Every one of you comes from a different background. Different biology, different culture, different relationship with food. Some of you hunt. Some of you gather. Some of you synthesize. All of those are valid. A student raised a tentacle. Then what will you teach us? Perspective, Danny answered. How to look at problems differently. How to turn challenges into opportunities. How to see that the thing threatening you might actually be the solution you need. He smiled. And yeah, we'll teach you to cook too. That part's important. The curriculum was unlike anything the galaxy had seen. Mornings focused on ecology and biology, understanding food chains and ecosystem management. Afternoons were hands-on cooking, learning techniques from dozens of cultures. Evenings involved shared meals where students from different species ate together, sharing stories and traditions. Danny's first practical lesson involved ravagers, now bred sustainably in contained environments specifically for the Institute. These creatures killed station workers less than a year ago, Danny explained as students circled the contained ravager nervously. Now they're the most popular dish in the station's restaurants. What changed? We learned to cook them, Petal offered. Partly. But more importantly, we stopped being afraid of them. Fear makes things bigger than they are. Danny opened the container. Several students stepped back. Fear is natural, but it shouldn't be your only response. Over the next hour, he demonstrated how to safely neutralize, butcher, and prepare the ravager. Some students couldn't watch. Others, like Andy and Petal, leaned in with interest. You don't all have to love this, Danny assured them. Some of you will focus on plant-based cuisines or synthesis enhancement. That's fine, but everyone needs to understand the principles. How to identify what's edible, how to process it safely, how to make it nutritious and appealing. Prism, the Silicon student, asked a question in their chiming voice. How does this help with the metallic parasites on my world? Same principles, different application, Danny replied. Those parasites are consuming your infrastructure because they need certain metals. So we figure out what metals they need most, provide alternative sources in controlled areas, and harvest them when populations peak. Turn them from random destructor into manageable resource. You would farm the parasites? Prism sounded shocked. Why not? On Earth, we farm all kinds of things that used to be pests. Oysters, bees, even certain weeds. The key is understanding what they need and providing it in a way that benefits everyone. The lessons continued, each one building on the last. Rita taught sustainable harvesting methods. Carlos demonstrated population management. Sue explained swarm dynamics and behavioral patterns. And Danny tied it all together with cooking, showing how understanding your food source made you a better manager of it. But the real breakthrough came during a shared meal in week 6. Danny had assigned students to work in mixed species teams, creating dishes that honored multiple traditions. Petal and Andy had collaborated on a fusion dish, combining Vryn herb traditions with Texas barbecue techniques. The result was shredder ribs with a sweet glaze that worked for both species. We argued for 3 days about the sauce, Andy admitted, presenting the dish to the class. But then we realized we were both trying to achieve the same thing, Petal added. Flavor that enhances rather than hides. The class tried the dish. Silence fell as everyone tasted, then smiles spread across faces, mandibles, and beaks. This is excellent, Quinn said. I can taste both traditions clearly, yet they harmonize. Other teams presented their creations. Avian students had worked with humans to create roasted grain dishes that both species found satisfying. Silicon students had helped develop high-heat cooking methods that unlocked flavors previously impossible to achieve. Every dish represented cooperation, compromise, and creativity. After the meal, as students mingled and talked, Danny noticed something important. The nervous distance from the first day had disappeared. Species that had never interacted comfortably now laughed together, shared cooking tips, and made plans to visit each other's worlds. Lorak visited the Institute regularly, impressed by the transformation he saw. "You have done something remarkable here, Chef Walsh. You are teaching species to work together through their stomachs." "Food is honest," Danny replied. "You can't fake a good meal. Either it works or it doesn't. When you create something good together, it builds trust in a way that political agreements never can." "Ambassador Trill visited yesterday," Lorek mentioned. "He did not tell me he was coming, but I saw him watching the classes." "Did he say anything?" "No, but he stayed for 2 hours. 3 days later, Trill requested a private meeting with Danny. They met in one of the Institute's smaller kitchens. Just the two of them. "Ambassador," Danny greeted him. "This is unexpected." "I have been thinking about our last conversation," Trill began. "About shared meals and breaking bread together. I dismissed it as sentiment, but watching your students..." His colors shifted slowly. "I see something I did not expect." "What's that?" "Joy. Species that historically have little in common finding connection through food." Trill moved to the counter. "I came to ask if you would teach me." Danny blinked in surprise. "Teach you to cook?" "Teach me to understand. My people consume photosynthetic nutrients. We have no tradition of preparation, no culture of cuisine. But watching your students create together, I realize we have missed something valuable. Ambassador, I'd be honored." Over the next month, Danny worked with Trill privately. They started simple, exploring how different preparation methods affected the nutrients Trill species consumed. Heating certain compounds enhanced absorption. Combining ingredients created new flavor profiles. Trill was a careful student, asking detailed questions about every process. Slowly, his skepticism transformed into curiosity. "This is more complex than I assumed," Trill admitted during one session. "The chemistry alone is fascinating." "It's art and science together," Danny agreed. "That's what makes it special." The semester concluded with a grand feast. Students prepared dishes from their homeworlds, enhanced with techniques learned at the Institute. The diversity was stunning. Meat, plants, synthesized proteins, mineral compounds, all presented with care and creativity. Danny invited the entire council to attend. They came, curious about what the Institute had achieved. As the feast progressed, representatives who'd been skeptical of the Institute found themselves enjoying foods they'd never considered trying. Conversations flowed. Barriers dissolved. And in the middle of it all, Ambassador Trill sat at a table with human students, trying different plant-based preparations. His body glowing with colors Danny had learned meant contentment. After the feast, as Danny surveyed the success, Speaker Bloom approached him. "Chef Walsh, my people owe you a debt we can never repay. But I must ask, what will you do now? You have changed the galaxy. What comes next?" Danny looked around the hall, at the dozens of species mingling comfortably, at students teaching each other their techniques, at barriers breaking down one meal at a time. "I'm going to keep teaching," Danny said. "This is just the first class. Next semester we'll have twice as many students, and they'll go home and teach others. And those people will teach more. It'll spread slowly but surely." "You are creating a movement," Bloom observed. "I'm creating understanding. The rest will follow." Danny smiled. "My grandmother always said the best way to know someone is to eat their food. Not just to taste it, but to understand why they make it that way. What it means to their culture. What stories it tells." Quinn joined them, his feathers ruffled happily. "Danny, I have news. 5 more species have requested to establish culinary institutes on their home worlds. They want to use your model." "Our model," Danny Corey said. "This isn't just human anymore. It belongs to everyone who participated." Pip floated over, unusually subdued. "Chef Walsh, I have calculated the potential impact of your institute. If current growth continues, within 10 years, over 70% of galactic species will have integrated some form of your teaching into their cultures." "That's not the goal, though," Danny said. "The goal isn't to make everyone cook like humans. It's to make everyone willing to try each other's way of doing things." Lorek raised a glass, a human custom he'd adopted, a toast to Chef Walsh and the Galactic Culinary Institute. "May you continue teaching us to see the galaxy through different eyes." The crowd raised their various drinking vessels, cups, tubes, and absorption pods. "And to all of you," Danny added, "for being brave enough to try something new." As the celebration continued, Danny slipped away to the kitchen. His kitchen. The first one he'd worked in on Station Harmony, where he'd butchered that first Ravager and changed everything. Pip found him there, looking at the space where it had all begun. "Are you well, Chef Walsh?" "Yeah, Pip, just thinking about how far we've come." Danny ran his hand along the counter. 6 months ago, they thought humans were too dangerous to join the council. Now we're teaching the galaxy to cook. You did that? No, we did that. All of us together. Danny smiled. That's the real lesson, isn't it? None of us are as smart as all of us. Humans had the cooking knowledge. The Vrin had the ecological understanding. The avians brought preservation techniques. The Silicon folks taught us about extreme heat applications. Everyone contributed something. A shared meal, Pip said softly. Exactly. Outside, the galaxy continued to turn. Planets faced challenges. Species struggled with problems, and conflicts arose as they always had. But now, scattered across dozens of worlds, beings were learning to look at their problems differently. Some challenges needed military solutions. Some needed diplomatic ones. And some, it turned out, needed a good chef and an open mind. Danny Walsh had come to the stars to cook. Instead, he'd taught the galaxy something more important. That the things we fear often look different once we understand them. That survival sometimes means adapting instead of fighting. And that the best way to bridge the gap between different worlds is to sit down together and share a meal. On Station Harmony, in the kitchen where a monster had become dinner, Danny cleaned his knives one by one. Each blade represented a lesson learned, a species helped, a barrier broken down. His grandmother would have been proud. Tomorrow a new class would start. New students would arrive, nervous and uncertain, wondering if they could really learn to see the galaxy through a cook's eyes, and Danny would be there to teach them, just as he'd taught the others. Because in the end, everything really was edible if you cooked it right. Even fear itself.